I want you to try a little experiment right now, assuming you're, in a safe place to do so.
Right. Maybe don't do this if you're driving.
Exactly. Yeah, don't do this in the car. But if you're at home, just stand up from wherever you're sitting.
Yeah.
Take a single normal step forward, and then take a step back and sit down again.
It takes, what, maybe 3 seconds? And I imagine for almost everyone listening, it required absolutely zero conscious effort.
None at all.
Yeah.
I mean, you didn't sit there and map out the trajectory of your joints. You didn't consciously think, okay, time to contract my quadriceps. Yeah,
You just did it.
you just did it.
Yeah.
But underneath your skin, there was this staggering, almost incomprehensible symphony of, like, electrical signals, biomechanical levers, and chemical explosions that just occurred in milliseconds.
Right. Your brain processed spatial coordinates, your spine fired off these rhythmic motor patterns, and your muscles burn microscopic packets of explosive energy.
All in a fraction of a second.
Yeah.
We treat movement like a basic utility, like turning on a faucet.
Yeah, we totally take it for granted.
But from a mechanical and neurological standpoint,
Yeah.
the fact that we can stand upright and move through space without constantly collapsing into a heap is, well, it's a genuine miracle of physics.
It really is. And today's deep dive is an unprecedented journey into that exact architecture of human movement. We're unpacking a massive stack of incredibly dense medical, neurobiomechanical, and business documents.
Yeah, specifically detailing the groundbreaking work of Dr. Christophe Delong and the Kinexa platform.
Right, and the entire goal of this research is to decode the human body's physical operating system. They're trying to bridge the gap between our physiology and artificial intelligence.
Which is wild to think about. We're going to take this apart piece by piece, right? Starting at the extreme micro level. We're looking at the exact millisecond a ballet dancer's brain decides to execute a highly complex spin.
A pirouette.
Exactly. And then we'll zoom out to the macro level to see how that identical neurological framework governs how everyday walking changes as we age.
Dude, that's all connected.
It is. And finally, we'll explore how Kinexa is using advanced AI and computer vision to turn all of this hidden, invisible data into a digital health platform, one that's designed to protect the aging population.
Because the reality is, whether you're an elite ballet dancer executing a perfect pirouette on a world stage, or, you're just someone who occasionally gets a sharp tweak in your lower back when you bend over to pick up a dropped pen.
Right. The underlying machinery inside you is identical. The levers are the same. The nerves are the same.
Exactly. And understanding how that machinery works, and more importantly, how it begins to fail, is the very first step to preserving your mobility for the rest of your life.
Which, let's be honest, is arguably the most critical factor in determining the quality of our aging process.
Absolutely. Loss of mobility is the first domino in a really long chain of health decline.
So let's get straight into the anatomy of movement. To understand how AI might one day analyze our bodies, we have to start with the body's original supercomputer, the brain. The source documents use Dr. Delong's hyper-detailed analysis of a pirouette en dehors, which is an outward spin in ballet, performed on half point.
Meaning balancing on the ball of the foot.
Right. It's presented as the ultimate test case for human movement.
It serves as the perfect stress test, really. A pirouette forces the human nervous system to operate at its absolute maximum capacity.
Because you're fighting gravity.
You're defying gravity, balancing your entire body weight on a surface area of a few square inches, and you're rotating rapidly. It demands flawless execution from every single neural pathway and muscle fiber.
If there's a microscopic delay anywhere in the chain,
the dancer falls.
Period.
Let's trace the spark. The documents state that a pirouette begins long before the dancer actually moves a muscle. We're looking at a timeline that starts at what the researchers call T-minus 400 milliseconds.
Right, 0.4 of a second before physical liftoff.
So it's happening at T-minus 400.
T-minus 400 milliseconds, the pure intention to move emerges in a specific region of the brain called the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. Okay, the DLPFC.
Specifically, we're looking at Brodmann areas 9 and 46. Now, under normal resting conditions, this area of the brain is humming along at a basal firing rate of about 5 to 10 hertz.
It's kind of idling.
Exactly. But the moment the intention to spin is formed, that electrical activity spikes massively. It shoots up to 40 to 60 hertz.
So the prefrontal cortex is like the director of play. It decides the spin is going to happen. But a director doesn't actually, build the set or design the lighting. The director just sets the vision.
Right. That responsibility falls to the supplementary motor area, or SMA. At T-minus 200 milliseconds, the signal travels from the prefrontal cortex to the SMA.
So the SMA takes over.
The SMA is the choreographer. It takes the director's broad command like, we are going to perform a pirouette,
Yeah.
and selects the exact, highly complex motor sequence required to execute it.
It figures out the specifics.
It figures out which neural pathways need to be recruited to make the body rotate without falling over.
I want to factor in the visual component here, too, because anyone who's ever watched ballet or even figure skating knows about the concept of spotting.
Oh, yeah.
The dancer whips their head around faster than their body to focus on a single point in the room. I always assumed this was just a trick to keep from getting dizzy.
Well, it does prevent dizziness by managing vestibular mismatch, but the neurology behind it is staggering. The dorsal premotor cortex, the PMD, handles this.
Okay.
This region is essentially the brain's visuospatial guidance system. Before the spin even starts, the PMD calculates the exact spatial coordinates of that focal point on the wall.
And the eye movements themselves, the saccades, are incredibly violent when you look at the raw data.
They are. During that head whip, the eye travels at an angular velocity of 400 to 700 degrees per second.
Oh.
To put that in perspective, your eye is snapping to the target faster than a helicopter rotor blade spins.
That's insane.
And the PMD takes those retinal coordinates and continuously updates the body's spatial map with a latency of just 120 to 150 milliseconds.
So it's constantly feeding the brain a stable visual anchor while the world is literally a blur.
Exactly.
The sources introduce something else happening in the brain around this time, located in the ventral premotor cortex. The discovery of mirror neurons by Giacomo Rizzolatti.
Oh, this is fascinating.
This feels like a massive leak in understanding how we learn movement.
It completely reframed modern neuroscience. Rizzolatti discovered that about 15 to 20% of the neurons in this specific area of the premotor cortex are mirror neurons.
Meaning they mirror what they see.
Right. If you hook up a professional dancer's brain to an EEG and have them simply sit still in a chair and watch another dancer perform a pirouette, their mirror neurons begin firing at 60 to 70% of the intensity as if they were physically performing the spin themselves.
Wait, really? Just from watching?
Just from watching. The brain is running a full simulation. It's downloading the movement pattern just through observation.
So if empathy is the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes, this suggests empathy isn't just a psychological or emotional concept. It's a deeply hardwired, physical, motor-based phenomenon.
Yeah, our brains are biologically desperate to mimic and understand the physical actions of others. We simulate their physics within our own neural networks.
Okay, so this brings us to a mechanical bottleneck.
Yeah.
The director has the intention. The choreographer has selected the sequence. The visual system has a target. But the brain now has to send commands to hundreds of individual muscles across the entire body.
It's a massive processing load.
Right. The sheer processing power required to individually contract the left calf, the right quad, the obliques, all at varying percentages. It seems like it would just crash the system.
It would. Calculating individual muscle fiber tensions in real time is way too computationally heavy. So the nervous system utilizes what are called muscle synergies, or modules. The brain does not think in terms of individual muscles.
The sources show that just 4 of these neural modules account for somewhere between 85 to 92% of the required electrical activity, the EMG variance for the entire complex pirouette.
Yes. Module 1 governs leg extension, simultaneously firing the quadriceps, calves, and glutes. Module 2 handles core axial stability, coordinating the transverse abdominis and the obliques.
Okay, so legs and core.
Then Module 3 controls the free leg that lifts up to the knee, and Module 4 handles the precise positioning of the arms.
It's sort of like a seasoned stage manager running a massive theatrical production. The stage manager doesn't run around the catwalk manually plugging in individual light bulbs and adjusting individual speakers, right?
No, that would be impossible.
They just look at their script and shout, "Execute scene 1 lighting." And local crews handle the microscopic details.
That's a perfect analogy. The brain yells Module 1, and the spinal cord networks distribute the specific electrical load to the quads and glutes.
The motor cortex issues the macro command, and the lower-level local neural networks handle the microdistribution.
It's an incredibly elegant evolutionary workaround for our limited processing speed.
But I have to stop and question the elegance of this for a moment, because if the brain has this perfectly modular, highly organized system ready to go, why is the process of learning a complex physical movement so, well, physically miserable?
That's the catch.
Right. If you put a novice in a dance studio and tell them to spin, they don't execute Module 1 flawlessly. They flail, they get dizzy, and they collapse. It takes years.
It takes years because establishing and refining those modular pathways is biologically and chemically expensive. It requires an immense amount of the right fuel and a brutal process of error correction.
Let's look at that fuel source, the bioenergetics.
A fast, explosive pirouette does not run on the slow-burning aerobic metabolism we use for jogging. It runs purely on the phosphagen system.
The ATP-CP system, adenosine triphosphate and creatine phosphate.
Exactly. This is the body's most explosive, immediate energy system. You have a very limited reserve, about 5 millimoles of ATP per kilogram of muscle, and maybe 15 to 20 millimoles of creatine phosphate.
So it burns out fast.
Very fast. This system provides maximum power, but it only lasts for 0 to 10 seconds.
It's basically a chemical detonator.
Right. During those initial seconds of a fast spin, the dancer's body is burning energy at a massive peak power output of 73 kilocalories per minute. It is a literal microscopic explosion inside the muscle cells.
Wow.
Now, if a novice tries to spin and their neural modules are messy and uncoordinated, they burn up all of that explosive ATP on contradictory movements. They fire muscles they don't need to fire, fighting their own momentum.
So the exhaustion of learning a new physical skill isn't just mental fatigue. You're constantly detonating your most precious, limited chemical fuel reserves on mistakes.
You're wasting the fuel.
So learning the movement is essentially teaching the brain to ruthlessly edit the code, eliminating unnecessary muscle contractions so that the 10-second fuel window is used with zero waste.
Which leads us directly to how the brain actually performs that ruthless editing. The plan is set, the fuel is burning, but a pirouette fundamentally requires balancing on a tiny surface while rotating. Gravity wants to pull you down.
Right. To understand how we stay upright, the sources move us away from the motor cortex and down to the lower back of the brain, the cerebellum. The research refers to it as the body's quantum calculator.
And the anatomy of the cerebellum is staggering. It only accounts for about 10% of the brain's total volume nestled down near the brainstem. Yet it houses an estimated 50% of all the neurons in the entire brain.
Wait, let me visualize that. Half of your entire neural processing power is crammed into a space the size of a fist at the base of your skull.
Roughly 69 billion neurons, mostly comprising tiny, densely packed granule cells. This immense density is required because the cerebellum's primary job is high-speed, real-time mathematical calculation.
It's the subconscious corrector of movement.
Exactly.
So what kind of math is it doing during a spin?
It's actively calculating the target angular velocity. A standard pirouette requires rotating at 360 to 720 degrees per second.
So 1 to 2 full rotations every second.
Right. And simultaneously, it must calculate the body's moment of inertia, which is constantly shifting.
Because the dancer's shape changes.
When the dancer prepares to spin, their arms are open wide. In this position, their inertia is roughly 10 to 15 kilogram meters squared. But the moment they pull their arms in tight to their chest to accelerate the spin, that inertia drops dramatically to 1 to 2 kilogram meters squared.
Conservation of angular momentum. It's like the classic physics class example of the ice skater pulling their arms in to turn into a blur.
Yes. The cerebellum has to calculate that massive shift in physics instantaneously. And it does this using a mechanism neurologists call a forward model.
A forward model.
This is where it gets truly fascinating. When the motor cortex sends the command down to the muscles to initiate the spin, it simultaneously sends a carbon copy of that exact command to the cerebellum. This is called an efference copy.
Okay, so the cerebellum gets a memo. Here is the exact muscular blueprint we are about to execute.
The cerebellum takes that blueprint and uses its forward model to run a simulation. It predicts, mathematically, exactly where your body should be and what it should feel like 50 to 100 milliseconds in the future based on that command.
It creates a ghost version of you just slightly ahead in time.
It's predicting the physical future. As your body actually begins to move, real-time sensory feedback from your joints, your muscles, and the fluid in your inner ear flows back up the spinal cord.
The sensory reality.
The cerebellum continuously compares its ghost prediction against the incoming sensory reality. If you start to lean a millimeter too far to the left, the sensory reality no longer matches the perfect prediction. That mismatch creates an error signal.
And the cerebellum has to fix it before you fall over. How fast is this correction loop?
The cerebellum computes the error and sends a corrective adjustment signal back to the motor cortex in just 25 to 35 milliseconds.
25 milliseconds. That is entirely beneath the threshold of conscious thought.
Completely subconscious. A conscious cognitive correction where you actually think, oh, I'm falling left, I should lean right. That takes at least 150 to 200 milliseconds to process.
So slow.
Way too slow. If you had to consciously rely on your prefrontal cortex to correct your balance during a pirouette, you'd be on the floor before the thought even finished forming.
The processing speed is incredible. But this still leaves the question of learning. The novice's cerebellum is making those predictions, but the novice still falls over for the first 6 months of dance class.
Right.
How does the cerebellum actually rewrite its own code to turn a wobbly novice into a master?
Through a brutal mechanism of neuroplasticity called long-term depression, or LTD, and its counterpart, long-term potentiation, or LTP.
Let's focus on LTD.
When a beginner attempts a pirouette, their motor cortex sends sloppy commands. The resulting physical movement is chaotic. The sensory feedback coming back from the body creates a massive error signal when compared to the cerebellum's ideal prediction.
The reality is completely failing the simulation.
Exactly. This severe error triggers the activation of specialized neural fibers called climbing fibers. These fibers wrap around Purkinje cells.
Purkinje cells.
Yeah, they're some of the largest, most intricately branched output neurons in the cerebellar cortex. They look like massive, complex trees. When the error is huge, the climbing fibers blast the Purkinje cells with a signal that effectively says, whatever synaptic connections just fired to cause that movement, weaken them.
So this is long-term depression. It's physically depressing or weakening the strength of the bad synapse.
The brain is actively erasing the bad code. It's suppressing the specific muscle commands that led to the loss of balance. It takes thousands upon thousands of these error correction cycles, falling and weakening the bad pathways while reinforcing the successful ones via long-term potentiation.
Does the data say how many reps it takes?
The source data is very specific here. It takes 3,000 to 10,000 repetitions of a pirouette to achieve true automaticity.
10,000 repetitions. I mean, that number is famous. It's the foundation of the 10,000-hour rule. The concept that true mastery of any complex skill requires relentless, grinding repetition.
We often view that rule as a psychological or cultural concept regarding discipline, but what we're looking at is the literal biological mechanism underpinning it.
Right.
You need 10,000 repetitions to run enough error correction cycles for the climbing fibers to prune away all the chaotic movement code until only the flawless sequence remains.
It functions like a biological autocorrect. But unlike the autocorrect on a smartphone, which will stubbornly change a correctly spelled word to a typo for years, the cerebellum actually learns to permanently delete the typos.
And before the final perfected movement is allowed to physically manifest, it must pass through one final security checkpoint. The basal ganglia.
Okay, the basal ganglia.
It functions as the ultimate go-no-go switch for the entire body. It operates via two competing dopamine pathways.
So like a green light and a red light.
Exactly. You have the direct prokinetic pathway utilizing D1 dopamine receptors. This pathway facilitates and encourages the selected movement.
The green light.
But simultaneously, you have the indirect anti-kinetic pathway utilizing D2 receptors. This pathway actively inhibits and suppresses any competing, unwanted, or contradictory movements.
Well,
The basal ganglia ensures that in the chaotic noise of brain activity, only the singular, perfectly selected motor sequence gets the green light to travel down the spine.
this level of detail completely changes how I view movement. We've mapped the electrical storm in the brain. The intention is locked, the fuel is primed, the cerebellum has run the simulation, and the basal ganglia has flipped the switch to go.
Now we look at the muscles.
Right, let's zoom in on the exact physical moment before the dancer pushes off the floor. We're at T-minus 100 milliseconds. The dancer is standing in what ballet calls the fourth position.
Legs apart, one foot in front, one behind, deeply bent in a plie.
To an observer, they look perfectly still. What is happening inside the muscles during this calm before the storm?
Well, the stillness is an illusion. Inside the muscle fibers, it's a high-tension, highly volatile environment. Let's start with the legs. As the dancer sinks into the plie, preparing to spring upward, the quadriceps on the front of the thigh and the hamstrings on the back of the thigh begin co-contracting.
Meaning they're flexing and pulling against each other simultaneously. From a pure physics standpoint, fighting your own muscles seems wildly inefficient. Why expend energy having the front of your leg fight the back of your leg?
Because it sacrifices metabolic efficiency for absolute joint stability. This co-contraction massively increases the physical stiffness of the knee joint. The biomechanical data shows it generates between 200 to 400 newton meters per radian of stiffness.
That's a lot of force.
It transforms the knee from a flexible hinge into a rigid biological lever.
That makes perfect sense. If you're about to launch your entire body weight upwards and spin, you do not want a wobbly fulcrum. You need the joint locked down to protect the anterior cruciate ligament, the ACL, from the explosive shearing force that is about to tear through it.
The joint is armored. But this creates a massive secondary problem, which the body solves with perhaps its most fascinating hidden mechanism, the gamma loop.
Oh, this part is wild. Walk me through this.
To understand the gamma loop, you have to understand proprioception. Deep inside your muscle belly are tiny, specialized sensory receptors called muscle spindles. Think of them as microscopic tension sensors.
Okay, tension sensors.
When a muscle stretches, the spindle stretches, and it fires a signal to the brain saying, the muscle is this long. This continuous stream of tension data is how your brain knows where your limbs are in space without you having to look at them.
Right, so if I close my eyes and raise my arm, my muscle spindles are telling my brain my arm is raised.
Precisely. But here is the structural flaw. When you flex a muscle, the muscle physically shortens. Normally, if a muscle shortens, the little spindle inside it would go slack, like a rubber band losing tension.
And if the spindle goes slack, it stops firing signals.
The data stream cuts out, the muscle goes proprioceptively blind during the exact moment of maximum contraction.
Which would be catastrophic if you're midway through a rapid spin and suddenly your brain loses the spatial coordinates of your leg because the muscle flexed too hard.
It would guarantee a fall. So the nervous system employs gamma motor neurons. When your brain sends the primary signal down the large alpha motor neurons telling the main muscle fibers to contract and shorten, it simultaneously fires the smaller gamma motor neurons.
The gamma neurons.
These gamma neurons are wired specifically to the ends of the tiny muscle spindles. They tell the ends of the spindle to actively contract and pull tight while the main muscle is shortening.
It reels in the slack in real time. It's like tuning a guitar string continuously while you're actively plucking it, ensuring the tension never drops.
Exactly. The gamma neurons fire at a continuous 20 to 40 hertz, keeping that spindle perfectly taut regardless of how hard the main muscle is flexing. It ensures that the sensory feedback loop to the cerebellum is uninterrupted.
So thanks to the gamma loop, the dancer remains perfectly, flawlessly aware of their joint positioning, even in the middle of a violent, explosive muscle contraction.
The engineering is flawless.
We have the legs locked down and sensory data flowing. What about the torso? Core strength is a massive buzzword in fitness, but what is actually happening in the abdomen right before the spin?
The trunk demonstrates a critical concept called anticipatory activation. The star player in the core is the transverse abdominis.
The TVA.
Right. This isn't the visible six-pack muscle. It's the deepest layer of abdominal muscle, wrapping horizontally around your entire midsection, connecting to your spine and your pelvis. It functions as a biological corset.
A corset designed to hold everything together.
But it's the timing that is miraculous. The electromyography data shows that the transverse abdominis fires 30 to 50 milliseconds before any limb actually moves.
Before the movement.
Yes. This is a purely feed-forward mechanism. Before the dancer's foot even begins to exert downward force on the floor to push off, the brain sends a preemptive signal to tighten the corset. It turns the entire abdomen into a highly pressurized, rigid cylinder.
It's bracing for impact before the impact occurs. I mean, if you see someone about to punch you in the stomach, you don't wait for their fist to hit your skin to flex your abs. You brace a split second early.
And this anticipatory bracing is structural armor for the spine. By preemptively increasing intra-abdominal pressure, the corset absorbs the shock of the movement, physically reducing the compression forces on your delicate spinal discs by 20 to 40%.
It unloads the spine.
A 40% reduction in spinal compression just by firing a muscle 50 milliseconds early. That is a massive margin of safety.
And this is exactly where we find a profound clinical insight into human aging and chronic pain. Because if we look at patients suffering from chronic lower back pain, studies consistently reveal a terrifying neurological glitch.
The delay.
In these patients, the anticipatory activation of the transverse abdominis is delayed. Instead of firing 50 milliseconds before the limb moves, the muscle fires 50 to 450 milliseconds late.
The timing is fundamentally broken. So if a person bends over to pick up a heavy box, their arms and legs initiate the movement, the massive shear force hits the lower back, and the spine takes 100% of the load before the biological corset has a chance to brace it.
The armor deploys after the bullet is already hit. A delay of just a few hundred milliseconds less than the blink of an eye leaves the spinal discs entirely undefended against the physics of daily life.
It's devastating.
When we talk about getting hurt as we age, we assume our structures are just getting weak. But often, It's a microscopic neurological delay manifesting as a catastrophic structural injury.
The brain is lagging, and the spine pays the price.
There's one more muscle highlighted in the spin preparation, the calf muscle, the soleus.
Once the dancer is up on demi-point, balancing solely on the ball of the foot with the heel raised off the floor, the soleus becomes the most critical muscle in the body. The soleus lies deep beneath the larger, visible calf muscle.
It's the deeper one.
Right. It's packed almost entirely with slow-twitch oxidative muscle fibers. These fibers don't produce explosive speed, they produce relentless, sustained endurance.
An anti-fatigue anchor.
While balancing on that tiny surface area of maybe 15 to 25 square centimeters, the dancer's entire body weight, compounded by the rotational forces of the spin, is driving downward. The soleus must work at 70 to 90% of its absolute maximum capacity just to keep the heel from collapsing back to the floor.
That's a huge load.
It fires continuously, constantly micro-adjusting as the body sways 2 to 5 centimeters back and forth to maintain its center of gravity over the toes.
Operating at 90% capacity just to maintain a static standing posture. The sheer metabolic cost of this single movement is staggering, but this brings us to the pivotal connection of this entire deep dive.
The transition from the elite to the everyday.
We've spent all this time mapping the hyper-complex, biologically expensive architecture of an elite ballet spin. The prefrontal intention, the cerebellar math, the gamma loops preventing proprioceptive blindness, the anticipatory core bracing, the anti-fatigue anchors.
The unbelievable reality outlined in Dr. Delong's research is that this exact same neurobiomechanical framework is required for you to simply stand up from your couch and walk to the kitchen.
The external speed is different, but the internal complexity is identical. The physics of human walking rely on the exact same chain of command.
Exactly.
So, break down the timeline of a normal walk. Does it start 400 milliseconds early, like a spin?
It starts even earlier. The intention to walk emerges in the prefrontal cortex at T-minus 1500 milliseconds.
A full second and a half early.
A full 1.5 seconds before you take a step, your brain begins prepping the system. Your visual system uses saccades to map the trajectory of the hallway, identifying obstacles and uneven flooring. The basal ganglia evaluates the plan and releases the dopamine to initiate movement.
But I'm not burning explosive ATP every time I walk, am I?
No, walking is fundamentally about efficiency. While a pirouette relies on a massive burst of descending commands from the motor cortex, walking hands much of the rhythmic control over to the spinal cord. Within your spine are networks of interneurons called central pattern generators, or CPGs.
What exactly do CPGs do?
Think of them as neurological cruise control. Once the brain initiates the walk, the CPGs take over, generating the steady, alternating rhythmic pattern of stepping, usually at a frequency of 0.5 to 1 hertz.
So the brain just has to provide a generalized keep-going signal, and the spine handles the repetitive left-right-left mechanics.
So it's the same software, but running on a highly optimized low-power setting. Highly optimized. The metabolic cost of walking is remarkably low compared to an explosive spin. You're utilizing an oxygen uptake, a VO2, of roughly 10 to 15 milliliters of oxygen per kilogram per minute. It's an aerobic, sustainable process.
I've often heard biomechanists describe walking not as a continuous forward motion, but as a series of controlled falls.
That is the most accurate mechanical description. When you walk, you're deliberately throwing your center of mass forward outside of your base of support. Gravity begins to pull you down into a fall.
And then you catch yourself.
You swing your leg forward to catch yourself just in time. The heel strikes, you absorb the shock, you roll over the foot, and the soleus pushes you off into the next fall.
It's a terrifyingly fragile process when you think about it. And because it utilizes the entire neuromusculoskeletal chain from the prefrontal cortex down to the slow twitch fibers of the calf, the researchers point out that watching a human walk is essentially a diagnostic goldmine. Everyday walking is a multi-system symptom.
It is the ultimate systemic stress test for the aging body. If a single link in that vast chain begins to fray, the deficit manifests visually in the patient's gait.
Give me some examples of how a structural breakdown alters the walk. Let's start with the brain.
If a patient complains that they feel stuck to the floor, they have the conscious intention to walk, but they simply cannot initiate the first step. This is called freezing of gait.
Freezing of gait.
This points directly to a failure in the basal ganglia. It's the classic akinesia seen in Parkinson's disease. The dopaminergic neurons in the substantia nigra are dying off, so the direct prokinetic pathway we discussed earlier is failing. The go signal gets trapped behind a neurological red light.
What if the breakdown is in the cerebellum's math?
If the cerebellum begins to experience micro delays in processing proprioceptive data, that 25 millisecond correction window closes, the forward model can't predict the fall fast enough.
So they lose balance.
The physical manifestation is a widening of the stance to artificially increase the base of support or an excessive erratic swaying. The patient looks intoxicated even when completely sober.
And what about the actual hardware, the muscles?
Yeah.
The term sarcopenia comes up constantly in age-related research, the age-related loss of muscle mass and function.
Sarcopenia is devastating to gait mechanics. Let's look at the soleus again. In the dancer, it works at 90% capacity to hold a spin. In the walker, the soleus is responsible for the crucial push-off phase of the stride, propelling the body forward into the next controlled fall.
Right. If sarcopenia weakens the soleus, the patient loses their propulsion. Their stride length shortens dramatically, they start shuffling.
And there's another muscle failure that creates an immediate physical danger, involving the front of the leg.
The tibialis anterior. This is the muscle running down the front of your shin. Its primary job during walking is to aggressively flex your ankle upward dorsiflexion so your toes clear the ground as your leg swings forward.
Okay.
If neurological degradation or sarcopenia weakens the tibialis anterior, the foot does not lift high enough.
The toe drags.
It's called drop foot, and it turns a carpet seam or a half-inch crack in the sidewalk into a catastrophic tripping hazard. The patient cannot catch their controlled fall, resulting in fractures.
This presents an incredibly frustrating paradox. Because if the simple act of walking is this hyper-complex, perfectly calibrated diagnostic test that loudly broadcasts neurological delays, basal ganglia dopamine shortages, and specific muscular atrophy, why is diagnosing these problems so incredibly difficult?
It's a great question. Why can't a doctor just sit in a chair, watch me walk down the hallway for 30 seconds, and tell me my core is firing 50 milliseconds late and my soleus is losing power?
Because of the absolute fundamental limits of human perception, there's a ceiling on what a traditional musculoskeletal exam can achieve when relying solely on the naked eye and human touch.
Let's pull the curtain back on that clinical reality.
Oh.
The documents outline exactly what happens when a 55-year-old walks into a clinic complaining of knee pain or a stiff lower back. What does the current traditional MSK exam actually look like?
It's a process steeped in history and highly reliant on the subjective skill of the individual clinician. It begins with the anamnesis, the patient history.
Right.
The doctor will ask the patient to rate their pain on a visual analog scale, usually 1 to 10. They try to ascertain if the pain is mechanical, worse with movement, or inflammatory, worse at rest. They ask what specific movements trigger the sharpest pain.
It's an interrogation relying entirely on the patient's subjective memory and ability to articulate their physical sensations. Does it hurt more when you climb stairs or when you walk down them?
Exactly. Once the history is taken, the doctor moves to the physical examination. This involves visual inspection, looking for obvious signs of joint swelling, redness, or muscular atrophy.
Visual cues.
Then comes palpation. The doctor uses their hands to physically feel the joint, searching for heat, fluid buildup, or tenderness along the tendon insertions.
They're hunting for clues with their fingertips.
Then they quantify the movement. They use a simple plastic protractor called a goniometer to measure the joint's active and passive range of motion in degrees. They'll test muscle strength by asking the patient to push against their hand, grading the resistance on the subjective MRC scale from 0 to 5.
And the documents list a whole suite of very specific physical maneuvers the doctor uses to stress test the anatomy. They sound almost medieval.
They're highly specialized manual torque tests designed to isolate specific ligaments and tendons. If the pain is in the shoulder, the clinician might perform the NEAR test, forcefully elevating the arm to compress the rotator cuff tendons against the bone to check for subacromial impingement.
Ouch.
Or the Job test, also known as the empty can test. The patient holds their arms out, turns their thumbs down as if pouring out a can of soda, and the doctor pushes down. This isolates the supraspinatus muscle.
What about the knee? The knee seems like the most complex joint to manually test.
It is. The primary manual test for the anterior cruciate ligament, the ACL, is the Lachman test. The doctor flexes the patient's knee to 20 or 30 degrees. They place one hand firmly on the thigh to stabilize the femur and use the other hand to grab the calf and forcefully yank the tibia forward.
They're literally trying to pull the lower leg away from the upper leg.
They're feeling for the endpoint. If the ACL is perfectly intact, there is a sudden, firm thud as the ligament catches the bone and stops the forward motion. If the ACL is torn, the endpoint feels mushy and the tibia slides forward too far.
That sounds uncomfortable.
They use similar torquing maneuvers, like McMurray test, where they compress and rotate the knee joint to listen for the physical clicking of a torn meniscus catching between the bones.
I understand that a seasoned master orthopedist can deduce a massive amount of information from these manual tests. But the glaring flaw in this entire system, as highlighted in the Kinexa presentation, is that the human hand and the human eye lack microscopic precision.
Exactly.
A doctor grabbing my calf and pulling cannot physically feel a 1 millimeter difference in ligament laxity. A doctor watching me walk across the exam room cannot visually perceive that my transverse abdominis fired at 2-0 instead of T-50.
The clinical eye cannot see a 50 millisecond delay. It cannot quantify a 10% loss in the oxidative power output of the soleus. Human observation is phenomenal at identifying macroscopic structural failure, the torn ligament, the bone grinding on bone.
The big stuff.
But it's fundamentally blind to the microscopic subclinical biomechanical imbalances that caused failure in the first place.
And this creates a devastating economic and personal cycle, which the Kinexa business documents label the wallet calendar surgery trap.
The current reactive medical system operates entirely on this trap. By the time the patient's biomechanical imbalance has created enough microscopic damage to register as acute, unbearable pain, they finally entered the system.
First, the wallet. Specialist care is staggeringly expensive. Copays, deductibles, imaging costs.
Then the calendar. You cannot simply walk into an orthopedist's office. You wait 3 weeks to see a primary care doctor who writes a referral. You wait 6 weeks to see the specialist. You wait 4 weeks to get an MRI scheduled.
Months of waiting while the patient is continuing to walk on a fundamentally broken biomechanical foundation, grinding away whatever cartilage they have left.
And by the time the calendar allows them to sit on the exam table and the doctor performs the Lachman test, the proactive window has slammed shut. The subclinical delay has become a massive structural tear. The cartilage is completely eroded.
And then comes the surgery.
At that point, the only viable medical intervention remaining is the final step of the trap: surgery. The system caught the engine failure only after the engine exploded, entirely missing the subtle knocking sound that began 3 years prior.
This defines the core problem. The science understands the hypercomplexity of human movement down to the millisecond. But the clinical delivery system is trapped in the macroscopic, reactive era of waiting for joints to fail.
Right.
How do you take the microscopic biomechanical precision of the pirouette analysis, combine it with the deductive logic of a manual clinical exam, and make it instantly accessible to millions of people before they tear their cartilage?
You build Kinexa.
Exactly.
This is the driving thesis of Dr. Christophe Delong and his technological team. The entire architecture of the Kinexa platform is designed to digitize the clinical eye and bypass the wallet and calendar trap entirely.
Let's break down the actual product.
Yeah.
Based on the minimum viable product, or MVP, documents, Kinexa is not a wearable suit.
Okay.
It does not require you to buy expensive sensors and strap them to your joints.
No, it's an interactive web application built specifically for users aged 50 and over, and it operates entirely through the standard webcam and microphone already built into your laptop or tablet.
The accessibility is the key. But replacing the physical exam via webcam requires a massive convergence of two highly advanced artificial intelligence technologies working simultaneously in real time.
Yes. Let's start with the anamnesis, the patient history. Instead of filling out a clipboard with a 1 to 10 pain scale, the user interacts with a 3D AI avatar that speaks to them. It's powered by a specialized large language model, an LLM.
So like ChatGPT, essentially.
You can think of it like ChatGPT, but one that has been rigorously trained on orthopedic diagnostics, neurological symptoms, and complex pain mapping. It conducts a dynamic, conversational medical interview.
The document highlights a fascinating capability of this LLM. It utilizes strategic interruptions. This proves it isn't just a digitized questionnaire.
It mimics the intuition of a seasoned diagnostician. If a patient is filling out a form, they might write, "My hip hurts." A form stops there. In a Kinexa session, the patient says, "My hip aches when I go for a walk."
Right.
The LLM processes that input and strategically interrupts to drill down into the clinical nuance. It will ask, does the ache start immediately on the first step, or does it only begin after you've been walking for 10 minutes?
Why does that specific distinction matter?
Because it completely changes the diagnostic pathway. If the pain is sharp on the very first step, it suggests a mechanical, structural issue inside the joint, like osteoarthritis grinding bone on bone.
Okay, what about the 10-minute mark?
If the pain only slowly builds up after 10 minutes of walking, it suggests vascular claudication, the blood vessels are narrowing, and the muscles aren't getting enough oxygen to sustain the movement. The AI is reading between the lines of the patient's casual complaints to build a massive differential diagnosis matrix.
Okay, the LLM handles the deep interrogation, but the avatar still cannot reach through the screen, grab the patient's calf, and perform a manual Lachman test. How does it physically assess the body?
While the LLM is conducting the verbal interview, the secondary AI system, the computer vision module, is actively analyzing the video feed from the standard webcam. It's applying highly advanced skeletal tracking algorithms to the patient's body in real time.
Is mapping the joints through the camera lens.
With millimeter precision, the AI avatar will ask the patient to step back from the camera and perform specific, simple functional tests. Please stand on one leg. Please perform a shallow squat. Please walk toward the camera.
Standard tests.
As the patient moves, the computer vision tracks the exact angles of the hips, the knees, the ankles. It calculates the speed of the movement. It tracks the subtle sway of the center of gravity.
It's doing the cerebellum's math from the outside?
Exactly. Because it's tracking pixels and calculating angles computationally, it can see what the human doctor cannot. It can instantly quantify that your right knee caves inward by 4 degrees during a squat, indicating a weakness in the gluteus medius.
Wow.
It can measure that your left stride length is 3 centimeters shorter than your right, indicating a loss of soleus power. It detects the subclinical drop foot.
And once it synthesizes the verbal data from the LLM with the millimeter-precise biomechanical data from the computer vision, it generates a root cause diagnosis. It tells the patient exactly which module, which muscle synergy, is failing. But it doesn't just hand them a report and say, good luck.
No, the platform immediately transitions into treatment. The AI generates a highly personalized protocol of therapeutic exercises. And as the patient performs these exercises in their living room, the camera continues to watch them.
This is the real-time correction feature.
The avatar acts as an ever-present physical therapy coach. If the AI tells the patient to do a lunge, and the computer vision detects the patient's knee drifting over their toes, a movement that would strain the patellar tendon, the avatar will immediately speak up. It corrects them. Make sure you keep your knee directly over your ankle. Lean back slightly. It provides instantaneous verbal and visual feedback to ensure the movement pattern is rewritten flawlessly, utilizing the same error correction principles of neuroplasticity we discussed earlier.
The clinical philosophy governing this entire platform is outlined in the documents as the P4 plus prudence approach. I want to unpack this because it perfectly encapsulates this shift in medical thinking.
P4 stands for personalized, predictive, preventive, and participative. Personalized because the entire protocol is generated from your unique millimeter-precise biomechanical signature, not a generic flowchart.
Predictive because by calculating those microscopic imbalances, the 4-degree knee cave or the slight soleus weakness, the AI can mathematically project where the structural failure will occur in the future if left unchecked.
Preventative because it intervenes immediately with targeted physical therapy to correct those subclinical delays before they erode the cartilage and trigger the wallet calendar surgery cycle.
And participative because the conversational voice interface keeps the patient actively engaged in their daily recovery rather than passively waiting for their next doctor's appointment.
And the plus prudence factor is perhaps the most important element for a medical AI.
Prudence is the safety net.
Yes. The Kinexa system is not designed with the hubris of trying to completely replace human medicine or handle acute emergencies. It acts as an incredibly sophisticated triage engine.
It knows its limits.
If the AI's computer vision and LLM detect what clinicians call a red flag, for example, it spots a sudden, severe freezing of gait that strongly indicates advanced neurological degradation like Parkinson's, or it detects a total loss of range of motion indicating a freshly ruptured ligament. It stops the therapy protocol.
It throws up the red light.
It immediately alerts the patient and refers them directly to a human specialist or emergency care. It filters the millions of cases of subclinical mechanical back pain, treating them digitally, while rapidly accelerating the truly dangerous cases to the human experts.
It's essentially placing a master hyperperceptive orthopedist inside the laptop of every person over 50. But I want to scrutinize the reality of deploying this. We're talking about highly advanced AI, large language models, and real-time computer vision being targeted at a demographic of 50, 60, and 70-year-olds. The technological friction seems like a massive barrier. If my parents have to navigate complex menus, calibrate a camera, and read small text while trying to do a squat, they will close the laptop and never open it again.
The Kinexa development team clearly recognized that the greatest AI in the world is useless if the user interface alienates the patient. The MVP documents explicitly detail how they allocated resources to solve this exact problem. The interface is intentionally stripped of all technological friction.
How do they accomplish that?
By relying almost entirely on the voice-driven 3D avatar. There are no complex forms to type out, no confusing drop-down menus to navigate, and no wearable Bluetooth sensors to bear.
So they just talk to it.
The user simply opens the web browser, stands in front of the camera, and has a normal, spoken conversation with the avatar, just as they would with a human doctor in an exam room. The LLM handles the natural language processing, understanding colloquial speech, and pauses. The technology disappears into the background.
An idea this ambitious requires a formidable execution strategy. The business documents in our source stack provide a very clear picture of the brain trust that is bridging this gap between theoretical biomechanics and a scalable digital health business.
It's a deliberate convergence of deep medical expertise, high-level financial strategy, and hardcore supercomputing architecture.
Let's map the key figures driving Kinexa. We've mentioned Dr. Christophe Delong heavily. He provides the foundational medical vision. He brings decades of clinical data, the deep understanding of the pirouette physics and gait degradation, and he's the architect of what the team refers to as the magical diagnostic algorithm that translates computer vision pixels into an actual orthopedic diagnosis.
He ensures the product actually works medically. But a medical breakthrough without a sustainable economic model remains a laboratory experiment. That is where Tolga Uziner enters the picture. He serves as the financial strategist, bringing academic and practical rigor from MIT and the London Business School.
His mandate is to figure out who actually pays for this platform.
Exactly. Uziner structured the robust, scalable economic model. He understood that relying purely on a direct-to-consumer subscription model is difficult in healthcare. Instead, he targeted a B2B and B2B2C framework, business-to-business and business-to-business-to-consumer. He focused on proving the financial metrics and the massive return on investment for employer sponsors.
This makes perfect sense from a corporate perspective. Musculoskeletal pain, particularly lower back pain, is one of the leading causes of employee absenteeism and massive spikes in corporate healthcare premiums.
It's a huge expense.
If a corporation can pay a small software licensing fee for Kinexa, and the AI catches the 50-millisecond delay in their employee's transverse abdominis before it turns into a $50,000 spinal fusion surgery, the software pays for itself 1,000 times over.
It shifts healthcare from a corporate liability into a managed preventive asset. To deploy this model into the massive United States healthcare ecosystem, the team brought in Bob Staubel, the U.S. market expert.
His strategy specifically targets those employer wellness programs, but he also focuses heavily on integrating Kinexa into something called direct primary care clinics, or DPC.
Yeah.
I think we need to define DPC to understand why Kinexa fits it so perfectly.
Direct primary care is a rapidly growing alternative medical model in the U.S. Instead of navigating the Byzantine bureaucracy of traditional health insurance, patients pay a flat, affordable monthly subscription fee directly to their primary care doctor.
It removes the insurance middleman.
It does. In exchange, they get unlimited access, longer appointment times, and highly personalized care. However, because DPC clinics operate on a lean subscription model, they typically cannot afford to build out massive in-house physical therapy wings with expensive equipment and specialized staff.
Ah, I see.
Kinexa positions itself as the ultimate digital MSK partner for these clinics. The DPC doctor can offer their patients top-tier AI-driven orthopedic diagnostics and daily physical therapy without increasing their clinic's physical overhead by a single dollar.
And rounding out this core team is the technologist ensuring the servers don't crash under the weight of this vision. Frédéric Royer. The documents list him as the high-tech strategist, bringing experience as the COO of CPearl, a major European supercomputing and AI startup.
Processing a dynamic large language model conversation simultaneously with millimeter-precise, real-time computer vision tracking on thousands of simultaneous webcams requires colossal computing architecture. Hanoyer's involvement validates the hardcore server-side technological ambitions of the platform.
You can see this rigorous technological focus in how they actually allocated their budget and time for building the MVP. The documents show a fascinating breakdown.
They devoted 50% of their development resources entirely to the back end. This is the brain of the operation, integrating the LangChain architecture, the OpenAI LLM, and encoding Dr. Delong's complex medical diagnostic engine so that it calculates accurately in real time.
Then, crucially, they devoted 30% of their resources to the front end. This is the live kit voice integration and the responsive user interface. This is what guarantees the 65-year-old user doesn't get frustrated and close the laptop. The frictionless voice experience.
And finally, 30% is dedicated to QA, quality assurance.
A massive chunk of resources dedicated just to testing.
In the realm of digital health, quality assurance is not just about squashing software bugs. It's about strict high PA compliance, impenetrable data security to protect patient medical records, and rigorous algorithmic testing to ensure the AI absolutely never dispenses dangerous medical advice or misses a critical red flag.
The market opportunity that justifies this level of intense resource allocation is staggering. The source documents project that the global telerehabilitation market is accelerating toward $9.43 billion by 2029.
That's a massive market.
Zooming in on just the U.S. digital MSK market, it's projected to hit $3.09 billion by 2030, driven by a massive 15.8% compound annual growth rate.
It's an explosive sector, primarily because the aging population is growing rapidly, and the traditional reactive medical system is bucking under the weight of the demand. But Kinexa isn't launching into a vacuum. There are already multi-billion-dollar unicorn companies operating in this space, massive giants like Hinge Health and Sword Health.
So what's the kill switch? How does Kinexa, a highly specialized platform, differentiate itself and beat the established well-funded giants?
The Kinexa documents define their ultimate competitive differentiator with absolute clarity. Solutions like Hinge or Sword are fundamentally excellent platforms, but they operate primarily on self-reporting and reactive rehabilitation.
They react to the problem.
They deliver digital physical therapy protocols after the patient has identified a pain problem and sought help.
They're essentially treating the symptom once the engine has already started smoking.
Precisely. Kinexa's distinct foundational advantage is deep AI-driven root cause diagnosis. Because Kinexa synthesizes the nuanced LLM clinical interview with the hyper-precise computer vision skeletal tracking, it does not wait for the patient to report pain. It actively hunts for subclinical conditions.
It spots the 4-degree knee collapse. It measures the 50-millisecond delay in the core corset. It quantifies the 10% drop in soleus endurance.
It identifies the microscopic failures in the motor modules long before those failures generate enough friction to cause inflammation and chronic pain. Kinexa completely shifts the paradigm of musculoskeletal care. It moves the entire industry from a model of reactive rehabilitation to a model of proactive, predictive, early prevention.
Let's synthesize everything we've explored today, because this has been a dense, staggering journey through the human machine. We began by looking at the absolute micro level, the sheer neurological and biomechanical miracle required to execute a single spinning pirouette.
The premotor planning, the computational power of the cerebellum's forward model.
The explosive bioenergetics of the muscles and the brilliant engineering of the gamma loops that keep us from going proprioceptively blind in motion.
We saw the immense biological expense of human movement and the brutal process of neuroplasticity required to optimize it.
We then zoomed out and realized that this exact same elite, hyper-complex science governs the aging body's ability to simply walk down the hallway. We uncovered how everyday walking is the ultimate multi-system diagnostic test, a delicate sequence of controlled falls that broadcasts our internal neurological and structural decay, if only someone could see it.
Which highlighted the tragedy of the traditional clinical exam, relying on the naked human eye and manual touch, a system fundamentally incapable of perceiving subclinical delays, leading patients inevitably into the costly trap of wallet, calendar, and surgery.
And finally, we explored the solution. We saw how Dr. Delong, the Kinexa team, and their comprehensive P4 plus prudence philosophy are converging advanced large language models and computer vision to digitize the master clinician.
They're democratizing elite musculoskeletal care.
Placing a diagnostic supercomputer in every home to stop chronic pain before the cartilage ever begins to tear.
It represents a profound, necessary shift in how we manage human health as we age. And I think this entire exploration leaves us with a fascinating, almost unsettling thought to ponder as we close.
What's the final takeaway?
Right now, as you're listening to this, whether you're sitting in a chair, standing in your kitchen, or walking down the street, your brain is quietly making millions of mathematical calculations just to keep you upright against gravity. Your body is constantly generating a massive, invisible stream of biomechanical data micro-adjustments in your soleus, millisecond timing in your core, tiny shifts in your center of mass.
It's constantly flowing.
For all of human history, that data has been lost the moment it was created. But what happens to our fundamental understanding of aging and our relationship with our own bodies when the standard webcams staring at us all day can suddenly read that invisible data better than we can feel it ourselves? Are we rapidly entering an era where physical pain is no longer the first sign of an injury, but rather the ultimate preventable last symptom of a process we simply failed to measure?
That is a brilliant question and a profound concept to mull over. We want to thank you for joining us on this incredible deep dive into the hidden architecture of human movement and the digital future of health. Keep exploring the science, keep questioning the mechanics of the world, and most importantly, keep moving.